Okay, so let's get to our speakers. We're joined today by one of our senior researchers here at NLI, who has been instrumental in our diversity, equity, and inclusion work, and is also deeply knowledgeable on the relevant science and research when it comes to growth mindset. Michaela Simpson. Hi, Michaela. Thanks for joining us today.
Hi, Gabe. It's great to be with you today.
Good to hear from you. And today's session will be facilitated by our co-founder and CEO, Dr. David Rock. Hello, David.
Thanks very much, Gabe. Good to be here with you. Just closing a door there last minute. There you go. Good to be here with you. And Michaela, thanks very much for joining us. Thanks everyone for joining us. We're going to talk about growth mindset. Actually, I want to do a little more on mindsets and talk about the mindsets, plural, we need now more than ever to kind of thrive through this time. And what crazy times. But, you know, it's been interesting connecting with really hundreds and hundreds of leaders in the last few months. And, you know, many people are, of course, really struggling, but many people also doing well. And many people really struggling and finding silver linings and ways to really, you know, maximize this time personally as well as organizationally. And I think that's a interesting place. You can have some really, you know, difficult things happening in your life, but also be actually having some great experiences through this. And how do we kind of get to that place as best we can is kind of the theme for today. If you don't know, those of you who don't know, and I'll give you a very quick snapshot for those new to the organization. We just get my Zoom is playing up. There we go. So we're actually 22 years old this year. We're based in 24 countries, big global footprint, advisor to over 50 of the Fortune 100. And our vision is actually making organizations more human through science. And we've never been busier because suddenly companies care about humans and science. So we've been very busy helping organizations think about the deeper cognitive science, particularly of thriving through this time, both individually and team and organizationally as well. So let's dig into that a little bit. Before we get into growth mindset, I wanted to kind of anchor on some of the things that might be happening in our brains. And one of my favorite things to do is kind of labeling and identifying what's going on for all of us. And right now, I started talking about this in March when kind of the pandemic first hit, that there's this pendulum and this wildly swinging pendulum is back, for better or worse. And I want to talk about it a little bit. And particularly as we sort of get closer to the end of the year, there's a lot of people have been saying to themselves kind of unconsciously or even consciously, like, I'm so glad 2020 is over. It's been a write-off. Next year's going to be great. And I've got some good news and some bad news about that. The good news is by the end of maybe a week from now, you're going to feel a whole lot better. The bad news is you might feel a whole lot worse till then. But I think that there's a situation right now where lots and lots of people are being overly optimistic and underreacting to kind of the data and what's really likely to happen and being kind of hopeful that things will improve soon. And there's nothing wrong with hope. Hope is a wonderful strategy at times. Denial is a wonderful strategy at times. Distraction is a wonderful strategy at times. These things sometimes are adaptive. I don't personally think that they're very adaptive right now. And the reason for that is that it keeps you in a kind of heightened state of alertness and a heightened state of ambiguity and uncertainty where many, many decisions don't get made from this place. So there's a lot of people kind of in this place of feeling like, well, you know, a vaccine's going to happen really soon. Everything's going to be back to normal, but there's just no data supporting that when you really look at it. There's another end of the pendulum, which is kind of the sky is falling, the world is ending. And there are certainly people that are really struggling in so many domains that it does feel like the sky is falling for them. But for others, perhaps there's a lot of folks in very high threat, catastrophizing enormously. Obviously, the election's going to bring a lot of emotions in North America and possibly more. But there's an overreacting right now. Now, the challenge with both of these ends is that you don't do really important work that is essential right now. Now, on the underreacting side, basically you have no incentive to really think about the data and really kind of improve things because you're just like in denial and you just assume it will get better. It's like, oh, I don't want to invest my time into rethinking my whole life because it's going to just get better soon anyway. That's what we tell ourselves. On the far right there, we don't have the cognitive resources to actually think well, right? So we don't want to think well, or we can't think well at either end. And what we need to do in the middle is have the right mindsets that help us to actually scenario plan. We can't predict the future. We can't be certain about the future, but we can kind of see some different scenarios and kind of think about those. And this mindset in the middle is really important. To me right now, this mindset is kind of accepting, and I'm sorry, I'm going to apologize in advance for anyone this upsets, but I think the most adaptive thing right now is actually to accept that 2021 is going to be as disrupted and difficult and complicated as 2020, maybe even more so. And to kind of settle into that and accept that and get to work at making things a little better on that assumption. And probably the most realistic scenario is, sometime in 2022, we get to a place where it starts to feel like things are back to normal in terms of the sort of socializing and, patterns of life that we're used to. So as hard as that is to accept, kind of accepting that this is really difficult and it will last a lot longer is probably the mindset to actually have. But this really brings us to something that we talked about early in the pandemic, which I think has become even more important right now. And that's the Stockdale Paradox. So Jim Stockdale was a Navy colonel. He was dropped into Vietnam, or his plane was down. He landed in a prisoner of war camp, basically, or ended up in a prisoner of war camp, was the most senior military person in that camp. And what he noticed was that lots of people didn't survive the prisoner of war camp. And guess what? It was people either overly optimistic that didn't survive, or people that were overly pessimistic that didn't survive. And he found that the people who did survive had this unusual blend he called a paradox of this belief in eventual success, but combined with a deep acceptance of the harsh reality. And what we're seeing, and I'm seeing it from hundreds of people, like clients, friends, colleagues, all sorts of people, like, just feeling like it's all going to be done by, early next year, it's going to be done. And it sounds tremendously like the stories he would tell of folks who, thought they would be home by Christmas and then would fall apart. So I think right now it's a really, really healthy thing, as scary as it is to process this. It's a really healthy thing to say, look, 2022, maybe even 2023, it's going to be amazing. Eventually this will sort out, and we will look back on this with amazement at what we did and what we learned and how we changed. But it's going to be really hard and really long until then, and kind of settle into this. And that, if you're sort of just hearing that for the first time and you're just like, frustrated with it, just let it sink in, sit with it. It might take a week or even 2 weeks of just kind of really reflecting on that before you can get to this next step, which is the really important one. And this next step is followed by taking action to make things even a little better. So what you want to do from this place, and he didn't sort of have this third step. So the Stockdale Paradox was just kind of these two. But the third step is really, really important. And that's, all right, now you're going to be here for a while. Whether it's a prisoner of war camp or, prisoner of COVID. Now you're going to be here for a while. What can you do to make things that little bit better? And really take control of your environment any way you can. And that feeling of control is so helpful for reducing an overall stress response and helping you survive, literally, and psychologically as well. So that's the Stockdale Paradox. Now, what does that mean to make things a little bit better? This is literally a growth mindset. And what I wanted to do is kind of, put the Stockdale work aside for a minute and talk about growth mindset, but just going to take a quick look at the chat. Please feel free to throw any comments or questions or thoughts in there before we, just on kind of what we've covered so far. Yeah, definitely from Marianne. So Viktor Frankl's Man Search for Meaning, he wrote a lot about a similar experience when he was in the concentration camps. And a number of other people have written a kind of similar frame that we have to actually learn to accept of how difficult it is. And then consider that, that we will eventually succeed. Now, this isn't just COVID. This is also, the incredible racial crises that are happening, obviously political crisis. There's a lot of things that are really difficult at the moment all at once. And we have to imagine that it's going to eventually get to a better place, all of these things. But it's going to be difficult in the process. And how can we actually make things, a little better, not just COVID. So growth mindset. So we started working on growth mindset quite a while ago. The first paper we published was in 2016, although we actually published something before that, about 2014. on the relevance of growth mindset for performance management. So we were starting to weave growth mindset into performance management from about 2012, 2013, and then published the first piece. We came out with organizational growth mindset in 2016. It took a while to publish that. That first paper you see on screen is a really important paper. If you're from an organization and you want to understand this concept, strongly recommend getting that paper, getting your head around it. It's all the studies that help you understand what it is and why it's relevant, how it works in an organizational context. What we've done since then, we haven't published any other original journal papers, but we've actually done 4 industry research reports. So one was the first one there, the idea report, followed by more about performance management, followed by a case study set. And then we just came out recently with how it supports organizations through disruption. So it's a series of industry reports available to members that are super helpful about kind of seeing what it looks like in reality. And what I want to do in this session, we're going to be a little more interactive. We've got a slightly smaller group, so we're going to be a little more interactive and really kind of hear from you a bit more. So please throw things in the chat as you kind of have questions or comments, and Michaela and I will dig into that. But I'm going to take about maybe 10 minutes to kind of walk you through our point of view on what it is and how it works. And then Michaela's going to take you deeper into the science. And as we do that, we're going to hear from you about what you've been applying and how it's worked and where you need to work more on and this kind of thing. So it's an opportunity for us to not just understand growth mindset, but all kind of improve a little as well, which is very growth mindset. So first of all, for those of you kind of new to the concept, let me just give you a definition. The belief that your abilities in any domain, so it's domain specific, like music, art, cooking, technology, a particular client. So it's domain specific. No one has a generalized growth mindset or fixed mindset. So it's the belief that your abilities in any domain can be developed through dedication and hard work, that brains and talent are just the starting point, right? That you're not inherently or innately good or bad in any particular domain. And that's really important. It turns out that belief has an enormous impact. Are you inherently or innately good or bad in a domain? So a fixed mindset is this belief that in that domain that you're not innately good at something. Let's say, technology. Maybe you just never really played much with technology, didn't learn to code, didn't sort of come through that time. You just believe you're not innately a technology person. Maybe you're really good with people and artistic things, creative things, but you've decided you're not a technology person, right? From that belief, you think you can't change much because you're not innately good, so you don't put much effort, right? You don't really like feedback. You avoid it at all costs because it just reminds you you're bad. Stretch goals are just a chance to fail dismally, so you don't set those. And that's a problem because stretch goals are where you get the most learning from. And then finally, this is an interesting one. When you work with someone really good at technology, you become less confident. You actually become less confident when you see a positive role model. Now think about this. If you're trying to make someone like digitally savvy, but they have a fixed mindset about technology, like giving them a mentor, no good. Giving them feedback, no good. Giving them a training course, no good. Giving them a positive role model, no, like nothing really works if they have a fixed mindset. So the mindset we have is upstream from all kinds of interventions we want to do with people. There's almost no point trying to help someone who has a fixed mindset in a domain. It's a really, really important insight. It's upstream from all these other things. Whereas a fixed mindset is just the belief that, that we can get better, that we can change. It takes effort, it takes feedback, stretch goals are good, and others' success is a chance to actually learn, right? So it's this thing about innate. So whether it's technology or working from home or dealing with this much change or being a people person or being customer focused, like whatever it is, it's this belief that, that's not really me versus I could get better here. This is the heart of the idea. Basically, you're always trying to, prove that you're good because you think you're basically innately not, and trying to look good, or you're willing to take risks and improve yourself and get better. Right? You believe you can get better, so you're willing to actually improve rather than prove. It's really weird how it works. If you think you can't get better, you just try to prove. But if you think you can get better, you try to improve, right? And actually get better. So that's kind of the simplest summary that we've got from it. And one of the things that we've learned is there's a meta habit that is really, really important. We've actually tracked we've actually tracked the percentage of people who start applying this habit now when you teach it to them. But there's a meta habit of notice and switch your mindset, kind of notice and switch. And what we see when we teach this to people, it's in the order of 90% of people every week start to see a fixed mindset and switch it to a growth mindset. And this is data from really large numbers of people now. So about 90% of people start doing this when you teach them well, which is really great. And this is the high level, thing, notice and switch, or notice and shift. So when you notice yourself or someone else saying, I'm not good at this technology thing, or I don't think I can deal with this much uncertainty, or this isn't easy for me to be this hybrid working back and forth from work home. You know, as we hear ourselves or others saying this, we can just literally add the word yet. I don't think I'm good at this technology thing yet. I don't think I can, juggle all this yet. So it isn't easy for me yet. And as we say that to ourselves, we shift everything about how we function. So just, before we sort of change gears, and I'll talk to you about the habits, I'd love to hear from people in the chat. What did you develop a growth mindset around this year? Just throw in there one thing that maybe you had a fixed mindset before March this year, and you've now developed a growth mindset. Where did you develop a growth mindset? Just throw in the chat. Online training, yep. It's a big one. Lots of people discovered learning online actually can work really well. Technology, networking. Yeah, let's get from a few people. We've got over 150 folks here. Let's get some growth mindset breakthroughs. Pilates, influence. Where did you start to develop a growth mindset? Skiing beyond the bunny hill, well done. Doctoral program online, networking. It's really interesting. All of us went into this crisis feeling like we're going to be massively disconnected. But actually, when you use technology well, you can be even more connected to people, and in fact, very intimately. And it's powerful. At NLI, we just did some numbers, and we worked out we had 6 times as many customer interactions over the 6 months than compared to the 6 months before. Because you can actually leverage online in powerful ways, and it can actually be very, very human. So lots of great examples there. Lots of technology. Lots of public speaking, learning, lots around learning. All right, so this is the notice and shift, and I think as we look at 2021 as well, we're going to have some new things to experiment with. When I ask companies what's the biggest breakthrough they had this year, generally the big thing that shows up is shifting to work from home really fast, like in a week, and consistently we hear wow, we never thought that was possible. It was unbelievable. Now we're wondering what else is possible, right? We're starting to think, hey, what else is possible? If we can make the whole company shift to work from home in just a week, what else could we do, with a deadline? And we'll come back to that in a few minutes. But just a couple of questions. We'll take some questions. Then Michaela, we'll go to you. We're doing well for time so far. Let's see what questions or comments.
I just saw Debbie's comment. What if you believe that you can improve in an area, but it is not something that excites you or you're interested in?
Yeah, I mean, it's not that you need to get better at everything, right? There are some things that just don't matter. How much did cooking matter, in February if you ate out every night, had a budget for that? It maybe didn't matter. Then the world changed, and suddenly having a growth mindset about cooking mattered a lot. So there are certainly things that it just doesn't matter that you have a fixed mindset. It's not maladaptive in any way. And then a situation can change, your life can change, you can get a new job, a promotion, and suddenly you need a growth mindset in that domain. So it's also just fun to kind of challenge yourself a little bit and keep growing. I mean, one of the things with the brain is making really significant new connections in the brain, like really building whole networks is really good for your brain. As you age, for memory, for all sorts of things. So it can be great to challenge yourself in the things that you think you can't do, and actually get better in those. It really enriches your brain in many ways. But there's nothing that says you have to have a growth mindset in any way there. Any other comments or questions, Michaela, you want to jump into?
Let's see. I just want to note Kirsten's comment. Can you give us some tips to help move friends, coworkers, family from fixed to growth mindset?
Yeah. Firstly, don't tell them about the idea because they'll try and they'll push back. It's very subtle, and you want to be very, very subtle. And, you know, it is adding the word yet, but you want to do that in a way that's just, you know, they don't kind of notice it. Like, and I remember my daughter, when she was about 13, was having trouble with math. She's doing really well with it now. She's really mastered it. But at the time, she was really struggling. And I just kind of kept having to say in different ways, look at the progress you've made since 3 months ago. You're actually making progress. And, you know, you just haven't got this yet. You're on the journey, but you are making progress, and just really focusing your attention on the progress. We'll talk about that as one of the habits in a minute. Michaela will take you through that. But it's just kind of bringing people's attention to the growth that they have done, or just like, you know, adding that yet, but, you know, very, very subtly, I think is important. Question from Denise. So, yeah, I mean, look, the whole performance evaluation, performance improvement, performance management framework needs a massive overhaul in most companies to embed growth mindset. And we've had other sessions where we've dug into this. We had one recently on performance management. It's probably up on our podcast now. There are 6 conversations: goal setting, everyday feedback, check-ins, career conversations, end of cycle, and comp. So there are 6 conversations, and you actually want to put growth mindset into all of them, into the goal setting framework, into the everyday feedback, into all of these. And, you know, instead of exceed expectations, just, you know, like you can talk more about growth and reward for growth. So, you know, didn't grow very much, grew a little bit, grew a lot, you know, really grew a ton. So you want to be like focusing attention on growth and rewarding for growth. Now you might do that in parallel to, you know, hit targets, etc. So I'm not saying, no, don't focus on outcomes and, you know, throw away outcomes, but, you know, achieve targets, achieved over targets, but additionally, like, actually focus on how much growth happened, because that's where the reward really is. All right, let's dig in. Michaela, I'm going to hand over to you. I think I'll frame it up, but there's this sort of meta habit of notice and shift. And then a few years back at NLI, we said, look, what are the most important habits? What are the 3 most important habits to really anchor on to build this mindset? And how do you really do that? I just noticed a question from Tracy. We'll come back to this. I'll make sure we do that towards the end as well. So Michaela, over to you. Do you want to talk through experiment, first of all? We've got experiment, focus on progress, learn from others. These are the critical habits. And by the way, one last thing, don't try and learn these all at once. These are things you want to learn one at a time and really embed and apply and get going. So Michaela, over to you.
Thanks, David. So yeah, I'd just like to have us first anchor on the concept of experiment. And, you know, what do we mean by experiment? That means trying out new procedures, ideas, activities, pursuing ideas, asking questions, forming hypotheses. So we actually do mean experiment, in the sense of, you know, it could be like, you're like, I think I might do better if I start work an hour earlier and take a mid-morning break. That's a hypothesis. And then you can test that out. So there are things that you can introduce in your life, experimenting, and additionally, questioning your beliefs, gathering information from multiple sources. And why we're saying this is really important is because more than ever, and maybe it's always more than ever, that you know, we need to be agile and we need to be innovative. And, you know, we think a lot about innovation in terms of work, and innovation requires risk-taking. It requires making mistakes, and experimenting is part of making mistakes. And so we want to get this idea across to you to become comfortable with trying things out, experimenting, making mistakes, taking risks. Because that allows us to generate alternative solutions to problems. It helps us engage in new behaviors, and it helps us take note of outcomes and learn from them. And so as you see on the slide here, it says, why remember to experiment? Well, part of it is we go on autopilot a lot, right? There are a lot of things we know how to do in our lives. So we do the same things over and over again. We establish habits, and habits serve us in that we don't have to think about them, right? It gives us time to just kind of do things automatically, and we don't put too much conscious effort into it. But if we want to start adopting more of a growth mindset, then we do want to experiment. We do want to take risks and make mistakes. And that does take conscious effort, which is why we need to remember to experiment. Also, experimenting is scary. It can be scary for some people, and it can be scary for a lot of us, especially if we're in an environment or a work culture that doesn't value experimenting or risk-taking or making mistakes. We might be in a culture that might not be explicit, but implicit is like, no, you don't try new things, you don't make mistakes, or if you do, you don't want anybody to see that. If you do try something new or take risks, experiment, that you might be censured for that. And so we also talk about organizational mindset culture. So there could be organizations that have more of a fixed mindset culture. Well, they will censure people more rather than laud them. Whereas a growth mindset culture, they will see the value that everybody brings to work and their ability to learn and grow through effort, where they see them as having the necessary skills or building the skills to learn and grow. And so one of the ways we can experiment, and David, if you can move to the next slide.
I just want to add one thing before we do this. So interesting, the autopilot. I don't know if people have seen this study, but Dan Gilbert at Harvard did a random sampling study a few years ago of essentially asking the question, kind of when a buzzer went off in your phone, you had to answer the question, where was your mind just now? Was it in the task you're doing, or were you mind wandering and mentally elsewhere? And he found that just under half the waking hours, people are actually on autopilot. People are mentally elsewhere. They're not where they should be. Or maybe it's okay if you're driving, that's fine. But so it was this random sampling study using phones, and fascinating. So we go on autopilot a lot because it is cognitively taxing, metabolically expensive to actually stay focused. And so we kind of shut down a lot, which means that we're not really there. We're not really thinking, actively about what we're doing. And I think about, the servers in a restaurant, for example, who they're mentally not there, they accidentally trip, accidentally do things. Like, we're not taking in data fresh. If we're on autopilot, we're not adapting to changing situations, small or big, if we're in that space.
Very much so. And some of you might be thinking, some of you might have heard of the term default mode network. And so that's also this phenomenon that research discovered when they had people in the brain imaging machines, where, they put people in doing different tasks, and they're looking at, they call oxygenation levels changing in the brain. But that was happening when people were doing tasks. And then they started to notice when people were just waiting in between doing tasks, they noticed that people did essentially what's called mind wandering, and they call it the default mode network. So most of the time, if we're not consciously focused on something and taking in information, then we're just like, our mind is wandering. As David said, you could be a server in a restaurant and you know what to do, and your mind is just elsewhere.
Yeah. And that's where you trip and, do something, or on a trading floor, who knows what. So yeah, we want to kind of remind people to experiment that way. But yeah, back to you.
Right. Yes. And so different ways that we can experiment. So look for potential experiments, again, in your workplace of, maybe you are afraid of technology or using Zoom. Well, get on Zoom and just kind of experiment with it and do it when there's nobody else on a call with you. There are different ways we can experiment with things. We can try new ways to solve problems. And also, I think what's really important, especially if we kind of might be a little bit more fixed, have more of a fixed mindset towards something, is accept that what we try might not work. But guess what? It's okay. We'll just try something new again. So it's an iterative process. And when we keep on getting that feedback from ourselves that, hey, the world didn't fall apart when I tried something new, it didn't work, I try something again, that actually creates a positive feedback loop. And we're, sending signals to our reward parts of our brain are lighting up. And again, the more rewards we get, the more likely we are to engage in a new behavior.
Yeah, that's great. And this is something that leaders need to be really conscious of, whether it's a team leader or a whole organization leader, that we need to send the right signals that experimenting is good, that mistakes are expected, that, when you make a mistake, you don't get punished. Obviously, if there are really significant ones, you've got different issues, but you want to really encourage that experimentation in the culture. One thing we do at NLI, we have what we call Mistake of the Month, where we share out the dumbest thing someone did. Most months I have something in there because I'm always experimenting and making mistakes a lot. But your Mistake of the Month is like literally the whole company hearing about something that someone did and sharing that, and then also hearing the learning from it. So I think it's really important that teams and organizations actually encourage experimentation and accept, that these things can go wrong. I think we have a question for you guys next. And not so much just like we asked you before, where did you have a growth mindset? I'm thinking more about in the workplace now. How did you experiment in 2020 in your organizations? Either in you personally or your team, or even better in the organization. So how did you experiment in 2020? And then maybe where do you need to experiment more? Let's get some comments in here, and let's see what comes up. How did you experiment in your organizations, and where do you need to experiment more? I'll do one while people are thinking. At NLI, we experimented with these sessions every Friday. We just said everyone wants certainty, wants information, wants relatedness. And so we decided right back in early March, we're going to do a Friday session pretty much every Friday, and at noon on Friday, and just kind of see what happens. And we've had thousands and thousands of people log into this. It's been a wonderful experience to kind of track what's been going on. So that's one of the ways we experimented.
I'd just like to call out, I believe it was Bob, or it went past, but somebody said, oh yeah, sorry, Chantel, turning all course content to a virtual platform. They had to experiment, and, and you're being agile, right? And innovating. So that's one way.
Yeah, that's a big one. And companies have been really kind of slow to that. We've talked a lot about how to kind of take your learning and put it online. What you don't want to do is cut and paste just what you were doing and maybe, shift it a little bit and put it online. You actually want to think fresh about the format, because virtual learning can actually be much better than in-person learning. The way we do it, we were doing 78% virtual learning before the pandemic. 78% of our work was virtual, and it was better than in person. But it doesn't start with sort of cutting and pasting what happened in a room into online. It actually starts with how do we create strong insights for people in these small groups. And it's a whole different way of thinking about, but certainly we've got lots of resources on that in our podcast and other places. So let's see what else is coming in. Michaela, what do you see in the chat?
Yeah, I just want to give a call out to Maggie, who said pushing boundaries on change in a risk-averse organizational culture, which can be really tricky because they're risk-averse. And so be interested in hearing how she pushed those boundaries on change. But again, it's not just the individual we're talking about teams, we're talking about organizations where these mindsets can be embedded.
Fantastic. Someone else, what else is coming up? There's one around leveling the playing field. So one of the upsides of a platform is that everyone can have a similar voice, especially if you use chat, and really encourage you to experiment in meetings of kind of sharing something and then asking everyone to make a comment in the chat. And you should be able to say something like, if you're here, I want your opinion. Otherwise, why did I invite you? Right? If you have someone in a meeting, you want their opinion. If you've got 5 people, 10 people, 20, not enough time, get a comment from everyone in the chat, multiple points during an interaction. And now you're increasing inclusion, decreasing bias, engaging people more as well. But that's one of the upsides you can experiment with, versus a conversation where you wait to hear from the confident people or the extroverted people or the, all of that. You're getting much richer data there.
All right, David, I think we're going to need to move on.
Yeah, let's go on.
So really appreciate these comments, but keep them coming as we go on. So I'm going to move into value progress and then transition to our last habit, learn from others, and then we'll take more comments and questions. So value progress is one of the second kind of foundations we talk about, one of the habits you want to build in order to embrace a growth mindset. And what do we mean by that? That means realizing it's also about the journey. If we can move thank you, David. So generally, as probably most of you know, a lot of, especially in the business world, we're often focused on what's the result? And so we tend to place more value on the end rather than on the journey. And we find that research has shown that often people who adopt a fixed mindset around a particular situation, they tend to have a snapshot of a one moment in time of their performance. Like, I blew that segment of that presentation I gave. When they're working on, a project that spans, say, 6 months, and they focus on that little thing, and then they can end up beating themselves up. And if they experience a setback, then it just looms in their head and it increases distress. Then they're not really able to focus on what they're doing. And then say maybe it's a success of what they do, but then it kind of they become fixed in that. And so and they're more likely to compare themselves to others. So there's this thing of just kind of taking, again, that snapshot rather than looking at the journey over time. And what studies show is that people who adopt a growth mindset around something, they're more likely to value their progress over time. Where were they before? Where are they now? Where are they headed? You know, what's the progress we've made? And as you look on that second bullet of the slide, when we engage in new behaviors and we're making these new connections, it needs attention and reinforcement. So remember, this is not a time to go on autopilot. This is where we need to give conscious effort to that. And one of the ways in which we can direct our attention around that is to, one of the strategies we talk about at NLI is called reappraisal. And that's a strategy that what helps you focus, shift your focus from in the moment, negative self-judgment, to valuing progress over time. And so a reappraisal allows us to see a situation differently, hopefully in a positive light, where we can reframe things in a positive light. And so other terms for reappraisal are reframing and recontextualizing. So that kind of gives you a sense of what I'm talking about. And I'd just like to share a little experiment with you that some researchers did, where they showed participants a photo of people crying outside of a church, which often, and the people who saw the photo made them really sad. And then the researchers asked the people to imagine that people just came out of a wedding and were crying tears of joy. All of a sudden, the perspective changes. And so it gives us that sense of how when we change our perspective, our view of an event can change as well as our emotional response. And as far as like brain studies are concerned, they found that when people did something like that, what we call positive reappraisal, it activated regions of the brain that allow us to think about things more pragmatically. And then at the same time, it reduced activation in the limbic system, and which reduced the emotional impact of a challenging situation. And so just by virtue of us changing, recontextualizing a situation, I blew it. Oh, wait, I didn't blow it totally. Okay, maybe I didn't get it yet. But I can improve.
It's a great summary,
so,
actually.
Yes.
It's really great. And it's really helpful, and it is reappraisal, isn't it? And it's kind of changing how you see this from I didn't get it to I just didn't get it yet, or I'm on the learning journey. There's a visual here that I think brings it alive. The rule of three, right? Where you're never talking about just did you achieve something. It's always where were you, where are you, where you're going. And so you've run a fantastic virtual meeting. Great. What did you do 3 months ago? How was it? Oh, look at all the improvements you've made. Oh, where do you think you can get to in 3 months? How much better can you get it even more? Right. And so you're always thinking about where you were and where you're going. And it really changes this desire to sort of be perfect. It turns down that obsession with your status, that obsession with having it exactly right, and kind of makes you more open to experimenting as well. So these habits kind of interact with each other as well.
Very much
Do you want to take us through the third one?
Yes. And then we're going to kind of zip through this because we definitely want to hear your comments. I also, just to tag on what David was saying about valuing progress, like when we start taking the focus off ourselves and beating ourselves up, that gives us more cognitive capacity to deal with learning, improving, interacting with others, which would segue into learning from others. So when we adopt this attitude that we can learn and develop and grow, one of those is to learn from others. And like in the workplace, it's not just from the experts, it's also from the generalists. It's from everybody. And when we take it into our personal life, same thing. We have so much to learn from. We have so many people we can learn from. We can get their feedback, we can get their guidance, we can get their knowledge. And if we move to the next slide, why do we need to remember to learn from others? Well, we have huge blind spots. So we often think, sometimes we think, we have a lot of hubris, of course. We think we know all there is to know. We might think that we view the world in the right way and that everybody views the world in the way that we do. It can also be the thing of like, if I'm not so good at something, I want to avoid any kind of feedback or any kind of reflection that would show that I don't really know this. And so then we just we create these barriers so we just don't see certain things. Whereas people who adopt a fixed mindset about something, a growth mindset, they see opportunities to learn in everyday actions. So they seek out they seek out knowledge and feedback from all kinds of people, from role models to reverse mentors. Those are people like, we talk, technology seems to be the topic right now, right? So you might be a senior person in your corporation, but you're maybe not as well versed in certain areas of technology, where you have this relationship with a mentor, where you both are mentoring each other in the areas of knowledge and expertise. And so I would definitely like to move to the next slide, because I'm really interested in hearing your comments. So just what are the ways we can learn from others? Ask regularly for input and feedback. So if any of you know NLI, we're very big on feedback and asking for feedback. Because there was one study that was conducted that found that when people asked for feedback, the person who was asked felt more comfortable in giving honest feedback. And so, when we create a culture where we ask for feedback, people can feel comfortable in doing that and actually giving you more, constructive feedback. And part of that is seeking out others. And very importantly, apply what you're learning. So we can learn information, but it's really important that we apply it and we do it. And then that can become a new behavior. And we, do that so it becomes a habit, but hopefully a mindful habit that is about learning and growing.
It's such an interesting one, this one. Like, if you had to pick one habit to work on for growth mindset, it's asking for input or perspectives or feedback, however you want to frame it, but like really asking people. Because what happens is we don't actually get very much feedback or very useful feedback. And we did an actual bio study, sending a team of scientists into a company and setting up this whole research study of people giving and receiving feedback, collecting bio data. Maybe my team can put some links to that in the chat. It was a fascinating study. What we found is that giving feedback is actually just as stressful as receiving it, often more, which is why we don't do it very much or very well. We tend to just give the positive stuff because we're really anxious about how people will take it. But receiving feedback also, really, really stressful. But when someone asks, it actually roughly halves the stress level for both people, the giver and receiver. So it's a really huge differential in something that we think is the major block to feedback, which is the threat response. It's a huge, huge differential when people actually ask. So we do a lot of work on kind of how do you create an asking for feedback culture rather than a feedback culture. And it makes enormous difference. But one piece of research that really kind of blew my head off around sort of why we need to ask. It turns out that other people know you better in terms of your skills, abilities, and potential than you know yourself, even if those people have only known you for a short time, like talked to you for 15 minutes. Other people are actually more accurate about what you're capable of, what your skills are, this kind of thing. There are some exceptions to that. There's a few specific, technical skills that's obviously hard to know. But on the whole, others are more accurate about you than you. So if we're just trying to kind of live in a cave and, look into ourselves and we're not getting lots of feedback from others, we're missing enormously important information from other humans. So we've built a whole kind of body of work on this. There's a really good piece we wrote in Strategy and Business magazine around feedback and feedback culture that my team can maybe throw in here. Michaela, you want to add to that?
Yeah, I just want to add that it is really important for us to have a growth mindset, because we know, I should be asking for feedback, but it could also be this thing, I really don't want to hear the feedback. And so we also need to be able to adopt that growth mindset, because it does reduce the threat of information that we'll get, where we can I can use this for good. This is to help me, rather than this is a reflection of where I'm failing. And so it's really, really important. You need to have that growth mindset, because otherwise you might still ask for it, but you still might have that, reaction.
You need that growth mindset to give it and to receive it. Absolutely.
Yes, exactly.
It changes things a lot. So it's interesting. Let's dig in. I've got a final question for you. I'd love to get your comments in the chat. What could happen if we ask for feedback regularly? What could happen? What would that be like? What are some of the implications of that? What do you think some of the things what are some things that might happen in your life, in your work, that could happen if you asked for feedback regularly? What is it? I mean, I'll tell you one thing, you could literally get better every single day at tasks that matter to you. Like if you give presentations, like literally every single day, you could get a tiny bit better and regularly. Yeah. I
just like to bring up Debbie's comment. Others are more accurate than you, contradicts Marcus Buckingham.
That's a rabbit hole that I don't know we have time for.
Right. I would just make the comment that, just really briefly, that often with ourselves, it depends on like who the person is. Sometimes we don't step into our abilities, we'll downplay, we'll minimize, like, oh, I'm not really that good. And so where maybe deep down we do, but we are not used to, and we have not been allowed to kind of step into our abilities. I would say that's one thing. And there are other things where there's some people who think they're way better than they actually are. So you can have these, you know, you can have the gamut of the individual experience. So I just want to say that I don't necessarily think
it's a rabbit hole, because there's definitely some contradictions between growth mindset and a strengths approach. And we're not going to have time to unpack that today, unfortunately, but we can have a conversation another time about that. Maybe something, Michaela, something we could write about at some point.
Right.
The sort of inherent contradictions and supports between growth.
Right. And Kirsten, the Dunning-Kruger effect. So yes, thank you all. We can have another conversation.
Yes, we might write something about that. It would be fun.
Right.
But just seeing some great comments here. What would happen? I mean, building trust definitely helps. You know, it's amazing. And one of the things I find when I ask for feedback from people is they then ask me, and we have a much richer, more open conversation. It's really, really helpful. So it's something that, you know, we would encourage people to do a lot. It's an organizational habit that, if you can build this into a whole organization, can be, you know, profoundly helpful. So let's kind of bring this together. Thanks for taking us through lots of that, Michaela. You've got these 3 habits. You don't want to build them one at a time. You don't want to like try to build experiment and value progress and learn from others all at once. What you really want to do is work on experiment, ideally not just on your own and learn about it, but actually with a team of people that matter. Because now you can hold each other account and, you know, bounce other ideas off each other, and kind of as a team, ideally go through and start experimenting more. Now, spending at least a week on that, maybe 2 weeks, maybe even a month, but probably 1 to 2 weeks is ideal. Really practicing more about experimenting. So, and then again with valuing progress, just make sure you learn that one at a time. So these are skills that you can kind of learn. Now, I'll give you some data of, you know, where we've taught this to organizations. These are the 2 data points specifically on growth mindset, not so much just on feedback, but on growth mindset. A couple of different studies. This is the percentage of people now actually activating a growth mindset, and we've seen all the way up to 95%. We've seen probably the lowest result is like 75% of large audiences, like thousands often thousands of people. So you can get a really significant impact in the number of people that are actually applying this mindset. Now, let me just go a little bit further into some of the industry research. We showed you 4 industry studies, and then we haven't talked much about them. This was one of the big findings from one of the studies we did, that top leader support is so important with growth mindset. You can't just kind of, tell people it's important. You actually have to have the top leaders exhibiting this. That's a really key thing. And we end up doing a lot of briefings, a lot of research briefings on growth mindset to top teams to really get them across the whole concept. The other thing is just, getting leaders to really inspire others and share their experiments and share their mistakes and share their learnings. And, this is how leaders have to role model. They have to actually get in there and really live this. Not just talk about it, as important. But we've been able to do that with some pretty difficult teams at times, up to thousands and thousands of leaders, and create pretty significant movement. One of the things I find with growth mindset is people kind of see it as valuable for their lives. Like when you teach this to people, they're like, wow, this could help me with my, golf game, they say as a joke. But then what they actually realize is it could help them with their partnership at home, or with their teenage kids, or with their exercise routine, or like people see that this actually could really help them, not just be a better leader, but, a more healthy, successful human. And so they often really get passionate about it and really embody it. We've had a lot of success. This is probably the easier thing to teach people. And in a diversity, equity, and inclusion pathway, we might start with this before teaching how to mitigate bias, before teaching inclusion and raising voices. We might start with growth mindset just to kind of lay the foundation for openness and learning. If we have the opportunity to do like a 2-year pathway, we might start with this because it's such a great place to kind of open leaders' minds and hearts to really, really learning. And finally, before we sort of put a poll up, don't put the poll up yet, but just the final thing I'll say, particularly for those new to our work, what we've just shown you are the 3 habits of growth mindset that make the biggest difference. Experiment, focus on progress, learn from others. You want to learn those with lots of people at once. You want to learn them one at a time, but also you want to make this a priority and you want to install this in your systems, like how you do performance management, right? That's come up. How you do talent management, how you do assessment, how you do development, all of it. So growth mindset is relevant to priorities, habits, and systems. And it's really, really helpful to think about all 3. This is our approach to change at scale. So a couple of closing comments. Just Michaela, any closing comments from you just about kind of building this, from seeing this and the science? Anything you want to add before we sort of go to some announcements? Oh, you're muted there still. Happens to all of us.
Yes, sorry. I was just saying, it's just really important for all of us to remember to be kind and gentle to ourselves. And there are going to be some things that we're going to beat ourselves up over. And then just to remember, oh yeah, I'm not good at that yet. And to answer somebody's question, I did want to say that, yes, we can be fixed mindset around certain things and growth mindset around other things. It's not just a blanket thing. And it's just a matter of, you know, being aware and being gentle and kind and knowing we can evolve, we can grow, we can develop, and it's all okay.
It's all okay. I've been learning piano again. I got a piano. I've been really playing quite a bit. I'm really enjoying it, but I noticed I had such a growth mindset about kind of playing my own pieces and just sort of improvising around simple things, but a fixed mindset about reading music. And I really noticed it. And even a growth mindset about aspects of reading music, but other things I'm like, oh, that's not me.
David, so that's so funny. I'm just the opposite. I love reading music. I'm fine, but ask me to improv. Yes.
There we go. So it's you know, really different for everyone. But you know, I really like what you said, Michaela. Be gentle with yourself, especially in this time. Be really gentle and kind with yourself. As you notice a fixed mindset, you know, just like being gentle with others, be gentle with yourself about that mindset, and just think about, oh, how could I just focus on progress? How could I experiment a little? How could I just really focus on my progress? Or who could I learn from? Experiment, value, progress, learn from others. Those are the critical habits. All right, stay with us. We'd love to get your answer to the poll. We're going to put the poll up. Just tells us how to follow up with you. So including there's a nothing for now. So click that if there's no follow-up that you want. It's always great to know that. We've got up there a scheduler demonstration of Grow, which is our growth mindset solution. So we have a completely scalable digital solution to teach these habits one at a time. You can teach 100,000 people in a month. Done that many times now. You can really activate growth mindset in any size organization very, very quickly. So you can schedule a demo of Grow, learn about our diversity, equity, and inclusion pathways. Our summit is coming up. I'll mention that. There's also individual learning opportunities. We have a bunch of courses online that you can do this year, brain-based coaching and other. We have a webinar next week, I think it is, October 22nd, on our feedback work, a solution called Improve. So that's a product demo that you can really dig in and see the actual videos and see how we're able to get this crazy habit activation data at any scale. We really have cracked the code better than anyone we've seen on activating habits at scale in a meaningful and measurable way. So you can see our work on feedback next week. We're hiring. I'll just say, if you're from a client, please ignore this comment. But we are hiring senior people, presenters, facilitators, consultants, writers, engagement managers, project managers, all sorts, many, many different parts of North America and other parts of the world. We are hiring and growing. So just, you know, go to neuroleadership.com. You'll see a careers page. There's other things not listed as well. Finally, here's our summit, Build a Better Normal. It's November 10th to 12th, 3 amazing days. If you don't feel like you can really spend the time, come to the opening session of each day. We're actually going to stream that free. So the opening session in the morning, US time, US Eastern time, November 10, 11, 12, a big session for this year. So this is around the clock, also around the globe. So we're actually doing it for different regions around the world as well. This is a little bit about kind of what we're doing this year. And we've got some incredible presenters from some incredible organizations as well. Gabe, I'm going to hand back to you. Michaela, thanks so much for being here and partnering with me on sharing this important work. Thanks everyone for your insights and input. Really appreciate it. And take care of yourselves, look after each other, and keep doing what matters. We'll hope to see you in coming weeks. Thanks everyone. Gabe, back to you.
Thank you, everyone.
Brilliant. Thanks, David. Thanks, Michaela. And thanks to the team in the background, Ben, Anna, Kaylee, Alexis, Matt, all those guys that make all this production seamless. Thanks also to all